everyone. Welcome back to the Imperfect podcast. I'm your host, Kirsten Pfeiffer, and I am joined today by Laura Fooks, who is the co-founder and chief encouragement officer of Speaks Loudest, which curates subscription boxes for teen girls to help them better love themselves, others, and God. She considers herself a recovering perfectionist, so you know that we're going to be talking about that today because I as well struggle with that. And she also lives with her co-founder husband, Aaron, in Denver. I'm so excited to dive into this conversation. So welcome, Laura.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So can you just start out by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Totally. So I grew up in Indiana, small town. I was the baby child, and so, growing up, people just kind of did things to help me out naturally. So by the time I decided to go to college, I really wanted to be able to go somewhere where I could learn to trust myself and rely on myself a little bit more and rely on God. And so I ended up out on the West Coast, close to you at Biola University. And so hung out there for a while, got my public relations degree, and just had an awesome experience. From there, I moved to Denver and started working in a corporate job, and just kind of always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to work with teen girls and help kind of encourage and inspire them. And so over time, that was how I got started with Speaks Loudest.
That's amazing. And can you tell us a little bit more about Speaks Loudest and really what the mission behind that is?
Yeah, so when I was a teen girl about a decade ago, I loved reading teen magazines and books and, just consuming all the resources I could. But quite often it felt like these things were either really shallow or kind of cheesy. And so I struggled finding something that felt authentic to where I was at. So I decided to make Speaks Loudest to fill that gap. And so now we create subscription boxes to help teen girls better love themselves, others, and God.
And I know that this also came from realizing that so many teen girls are hard on themselves or don't really have authentic messaging. Why do you think that, where does that come from? And I feel like no matter you're a teen or an adult, worthiness is something that we all struggle with. So what has your experience been with that, and where do you think that stems from?
I think that stems from having some self-doubt and fear of being lovable. At least I know that really resonated with me and seems to be kind of a common theme these days when girls can literally go online and see all kinds of levels of wealth, people who are, in the best shape of their lives because they have a personal trainer and chef and all these things. And I think it causes a lot of self-doubt at times. And so for girls, being able to lean into the fact that we are loved and we are fine, good, as imperfect people. So I just think that so many times we hold ourselves up to higher standards than we would hold anybody else up to even. And so just being able to look at who we are and understand that it doesn't matter what others are saying. It doesn't matter, what messages you're getting from people who don't know you. What are the people who know you the best? What do they think about you? What do they know about you to be true? And how are they encouraging you to walk forward in love?
Yeah. And I think you touched on something so important. It's we do receive these messages from media and these standards that have been set. And honestly, so many of the things I've even found myself falling into is stacking up against these honestly trends, it used to be be super skinny, and then it's be curvier, and whatever it is. I feel like a very light example of this is eyebrow trends. It used to be really into be have thin eyebrows, and then it was thicker eyebrows. And if you try to chase the crowd, you're not only going to be exhausted, but you're going to lose yourself in the process. And so I think coming back to, and I know for me, that's just spending time by myself and time. I know that you're a believer. I am as well, spending time with God. But whether you believe that or not, just having time to like check in with yourself and be like, where am I seeking validation from? Like, where am I getting my value from? And if it's external, then you're never going to really feel satisfied. And if you do feel satisfied, it's going to be really shallow, and it's also going to be vulnerable to falling apart the second that one of those external factors decides that they don't approve of you. And so I love the mission that you guys are on, because I think it does start with, it's something that adults struggle with, and it's something that we'll struggle with our whole lives, I think, but really addressing it at its root in like those formative years is so important.
Oh yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying, and just understanding that, like you said, if you're looking for your validation from the world, like that could change in a split second. That trend is going to change, like what people value or hold up as the right thing or the good thing or the like, I don't know, like cool thing, like that's going to change. And so being able to know yourself, I mean, that's something I like preach over and over again to girls, is understanding yourself, knowing what you truly like, what you truly don't like, and understanding how that plays into your view of yourself and how you relate to others.
Yeah, absolutely. Because then no one can take that away from you. And so I know that you said, as in your bio, it's like you're a recovering perfectionist. So what has that journey been like for you?
When I was a freshman in college, I just had a realization of how much perfectionism had really taken over my life in the past few years. And personally, for me, that stemmed from a lot of pride, and just being able to look at that and say, wow, I didn't even realize I was in that place. And so kind of then from that point forward, trying to take steps actively to say, I don't have to be perfect to be loved. And being able to actually lean into those vulnerabilities and imperfections, because that's when we connect to others the deepest and really like can build those formative friendships that you're not going to ever get to a level of depth if you can't be vulnerable and can't be your true self.
That's incredible. And I think you made such an important point, that realizing that we don't have to be perfect to be loved. And I think starting with that for ourselves, like that we don't have to be perfect to love ourselves, then you realize that the right people in your lives that you'll attract will love you whether you're perfect or not. And I think also what you said about pride is so true too. I think sometimes when things are going so well and it seems like you're in a stride, and that's where because I would consider myself a recovering perfectionist as well. So part of that is you still struggle with it from time to time. And I think that when things are going really well, I sometimes, without realizing it, will be like, I'm walking on this tightrope of like, I need to keep it all together. Like things need to keep going well. I need to make sure that I don't mess up. And sometimes in our mess ups and our mistakes, that's actually where we have the most growth. So just realizing that we are imperfect beings, and that in those vulnerabilities and those weaknesses are not only where we can grow, but then we can connect with others. Like you said, it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And just how you said that in some of those moments of imperfections, that's when we experience the most growth. Like I know personally, I've been married for a little over 4 years now, and every single time there's an argument, having to say like, okay, I need to take a step back because Laura is not always right, or Laura like needs to take it down a notch, and just being able to say, okay, like I'm going to trust the other person in this relationship, or I'm going to trust that God will help me work it out, and I don't have to be perfect in every single approach to what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, the more that we can approach that and have that, just letting go of perfectionism in our interpersonal relationships too, then we can start to create like a culture around that where we don't feel like everything has to be perfect and that we're living up to this unattainable standard.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And that's, I think, something I've been thinking about too, is what does it look like to disagree with people lovingly? We're in a culture right now where things are very divided. People have very different political opinions or just thoughts on how things should be done in our country. And I've definitely been thinking about that and leaning into that as I've interacted with family members or friends or whoever that have different opinions. and just trying to lean into that spot of mutual understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And how has that like shaped out for you? Like, because I think it is something that, especially after this year, these things that we had maybe patched over and tried to make it look like it was not an imperfection in our world, they really were coming to the root. And with that, there's messiness, and everyone's going to react to that differently. Some people are more willing to lean into the places of our society that need healing and be able to admit where we're part of the problem. And then other people are going to feel threatened by change and not wanting to change the status quo. So I think like realizing where everyone's at and that there are going to be differences, and to not like demonize the other person just because they're not where you're at, no matter what side you're on. But what are some ways that has shaped out for you in your life?
I think the biggest thing for me has been trying to do more listening than talking. When I don't understand someone else or know where they're coming from, or really understand like why would you think that, or how could you be in that position, the biggest thing for me has been to stop for a second, again, like take off that layer of pride that I have and say, okay, let me really listen to understand, not just listen to respond. And I think I was listening to a podcast the other day and really appreciated this advice from Carlos Whitaker. And he said, when you're in those situations, try to think of things like three things, basically. So number one, you're thinking, what do I want for myself? Number two, what do I want for the other person? And number three, what do I want for the relationship? And really letting those questions kind of guide how we navigate those conversations, starting with listening and then asking those key questions to what do I really want out of this? Do I want to be heard? Or do I want more than that, to understand this person? And, if it's someone you have a close relationship with, then you're probably going to keep dealing with them and different issues and things. So being able to say, like, I'm going to lean into the relationship and into this hard place and just, keep talking about the hard things, even though they're hard, and hope that someday we'll at least be able to see each other's side, even if we don't come to full agreement.
Absolutely. And I think so many times we're afraid of having those conversations because, if I'm being honest, sometimes I'm like, I have this really strong conviction that I'm holding on to, and subconsciously I think that we're afraid of being wrong, or that maybe what we were living our life by was not right or something. And so, but every time I've had one of those conversations that was challenging, I've always come out either, having a more refined and like nuanced point of view, or I just really understand more deeply why I believe what I believe. Because if you're not forced to defend your beliefs, then you're not holding them as deeply. And so I think that approaching those conversations and asking those questions can even reveal some of your intentions that you might not have been aware of. Like, I think that's brilliant, saying like, what do I want from this? Because sometimes, like, it might just be that you want to be right, and nothing productive is going to come out of just trying to prove that you're right. Again, that gets back to pride. So I think that's really great advice.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think it's interesting that we are talking about like perfectionism and self-love, and then also loving other people, because I think the two are so connected. And that's really like what I believe. And, this podcast, I talk a lot about human trafficking, but I also talk a lot about personal development, because I think that helping other people, especially in a space like human trafficking, is only sustainable if you first are taking care of yourself. So I know that is also in alignment with your mission for Light Speaks Loudest. So I would love if you could just talk a little bit more about that.
I would totally agree with you. And I think that the thing that I've come to realize is that in the Bible, Jesus tells us the greatest commandment is to love God and love others. But it's really hard to do that well when you're not loving yourself well. It's really hard to pour out of an empty cup. So just being able to embrace and love ourselves, and I think that also gives us confidence and recognition that, at the end of the day, whose opinion really matters? Like, is it everybody out there? Is it all my critics or haters? Or is it the people who are close to me, the Lord I serve? Like, whatever that may be for you, I think just recognizing that you're never going to be able to please everyone. But if you start with loving yourself and understanding yourself, then you're able to give a lot more of yourself, and you're able to give in a way that's also empowering to you.
Yeah, I think when you start to try to please everyone, and it can be out of a place of, like, out of a good place, right? Like wanting to love other people. But that's something that on my walk I've had to realize, that actually trying to like please everyone is not actually really loving to them, because it's not coming from an authentic place of being connected to who I am and what I believe. It's just acting out of this like shallow surface level, like I just want to tell you what you want to hear, you know? And so, and by doing that with everyone, then you're actually like not being true to yourself, and then you actually can't love them as well as you could if you were coming from a grounded place of authenticity.
Right. And I think that's why, we agree that it's so important to listen to others too, because if you're constantly looking and thinking about what am I getting out of this, or like, do I just want to be right or want to be the person who like proves all these points, then you're not necessarily even caring or loving the other person.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of it does come back to, especially when you're not seeing like eye to eye with people on things, a lot of it comes back to empathy. And so, and just, we kind of touched on this before about like trying to understand where the other person is at. So what are some practical ways that people can practice empathy to like help with those hard conversations?
When it comes to empathy, I think we tend to overthink it. Sometimes empathy can be found in really small actions. So I'm thinking about the other day, I was in line at Costco and I had just run in to get a couple things. So I was just carrying them, and the lines are crazy busy on a weekend, right? And so I got in line, and the woman in front of me was like, "Oh, I have a whole cart. You only have 2 items. Here, you go." And I think that just really touched me, because I thought that was so kind. She didn't have to do that. I would have been not happy, but I would have waited in line for however long and just gone about my day. But being able to see from someone else's perspective, right? Like that's how we create empathy. So being able to look at something little or small and even just say like, what can I do? What can I do there? Whether that's letting someone in front of you in line, or like for me, I'm a big foodie. And so I love making food and serving food and entertaining and everything. So sometimes when I'm like looking at serving up a dish, I'm like, ooh, I really want like that piece because it looks really good or whatever. So being able to say, no, I'll give that to someone else. Like, I think it can be really small things, and it just comes back to putting ourselves in the other person's shoes and saying like, okay, how can I love them in a way that isn't always coming back to me? So being able to take those small actions, and then also seek out opposing viewpoints. I know sometimes we don't really like to do that, or maybe we don't think to do that. But that's been something that I've been trying to do a little bit more, especially like from the political side of things, is being able to seek out the opposite side and just hear them out, hear them through, whether that's listening to a podcast, watching a show, or just talking to a friend. Because at the end of the day, you're going to, like you said before, you're going to either learn something, or you're going to hold your own beliefs even deeper at that point, because you understand better where the other person's coming from.
Absolutely. And I think too, one of the 3 questions that you mentioned before of like, what do I want out of this relationship? Whether that be like an interpersonal relationship, or even just like zooming out and making it more macro, like what do we want for this country and for this world? Like there's a reason, I think, why we're all here at the same time. And like my pastor says this all the time, but he's like, we're all sucking oxygen on planet Earth at the same period in history. I think we can agree that we have a lot more in common than we don't have in common, right? And so being able to look at people from that perspective, I think that just automatically increases empathy and automatically puts us in a position of, yeah, like why are we focusing so much on the differences, and also how can we learn from each other in those differences, because we all are created so uniquely, and there's something beautiful to that. And I think that we can get to a better place if we all just listen, like you said, and The example about Costco, I feel like highlighted something too. Like the woman had to be looking up and paying attention to even see that there was a woman behind her with only 2 items. And how often, myself included, I'm like the worst at this. When I have a spare moment standing in the grocery line, I'm just looking at my phone. And so I think another way that we can practice empathy is by simply like looking up and being present with people and responding to them like a human being. I think that can just be an easy way to practice empathy.
That's such a great point because, yeah, how many times do we just pull out our phones because we're bored or we're waiting or whatever, when we could actually just be looking around and just kind of leaning into that moment of where we are and what we're doing, as opposed to like mentally, virtually transporting ourselves somewhere else.
Right. And kind of making the link back to perfectionism here and really healing those parts of us. Like, I think that also has to do with checking in. And it's so easy to distract ourselves from that alone time with ourselves, and really having a check-in of like, where am I at and why are these things triggering me, whether it be perfectionism or feeling like you have to perform for people. And so what are some practical ways that you have overcome your perfectionism, or just more broadly to someone listening, to have that space to check in with themselves?
So as you already know, Kirsten, I call myself a recovering perfectionist because I don't believe I will ever completely overcome it at this stage in life. So I think the biggest thing for me has been taking those steps to recognize where things matter and my detail-oriented nature is important and good, and where it doesn't really matter as much. So one example is that I was outside doing yard work the other day, and I wanted to pull up every single tiny weed and the little like tiniest green pieces in the mulch. And then I realized, like, why am I spending so much time on this? Like, nobody's going to care. No one's going to look at this. So even being able to like distinguish in our minds, like, what is important? Like, I should probably be very detailed and perfectionistic when it comes to doing my taxes. But, taking care of my yard, like, at the end of the day, no one's really going to care about that. So I think it's been great for me to be able to do that. And then the other thing that I've been trying to lean into a little bit more is journaling. So if there's a topic where I feel like I don't know myself very well, or I don't understand why I reacted a certain way, or even just want to think more about a topic, being able to kind of set aside the time to like sit down for 30 minutes and think about it, or journal about it, or look up resources or whatever to better understand that. And I have a journal that I literally just write things down in and then try to come back to and think about. And that gives me the freedom to say, like, I don't know in the moment. I don't know why I reacted that way, or I'm not really sure what I think about X topic, but let me go and think about it. And then I don't have to like hold myself to a perfect standard in the moment. I can just go and explore a little bit.
Yeah. And I think that people relate to whether you're journaling that and you're like, I don't know, or you just embrace that in your day-to-day life, where if someone asks you a hard question or you're in an argument with someone, right, or you're not seeing eye to eye, I think that there's something so powerful about being able to say, I don't know, because at the end of the day, we are all imperfect beings and we don't know what we don't know, especially when we get into matters of like faith. I think so many times Christians try to act like they know every answer, and that actually pushes people away. And there are things that, like, if we were God, we would be God, right? Like, there's a reason why he's God and we're not. Like, there's certain things that like we won't know, on this earth. And so I think that really channeling that into all parts of our lives, then we can have this posture of humility, and we can also have a lot more grace and empathy for people in those conversations. And then I love what you said about journaling too, because I think that perfectionism is very related to anxiety, right? And just like anxiety usually is an indication that there's a root cause, something's off, in your root core. It's not just the anxiety is indicating something deeper. And I think with perfectionism, it indicates something deeper. So as we've been saying, that like recovering perfectionism, it's this like pendulum swing of like, sometimes you feel like you're really recovered, other times you struggle with it. So if you're in that place of feeling like you're struggling with it, I know for me, I've had to really take that time to sit. And I also like to journal and really be honest with myself of like, where is this anxiety and this feeling like I need to perform coming from? And a lot of times it's because I've kind of let go of knowing that I'm inherently worthy and that I could screw up this whole podcast. I could, fail that audition. I can, whatever it is. And I'm still like just as valuable today as I will be tomorrow, as I will be when I'm like winning a big award, like whatever it is. And so I think that if you can get to that place, and it's really hard, it's a lot easier said than done. But, I've heard even like artists before, like talking about winning a Grammy, and they're like at the peak of the thing that should make them feel the most worthy. And then they realize that they feel so empty because they still haven't worked on those root issues of what's making them feel unsettled. And so I think we try to, especially as perfectionists, we try to fill the void of that unsettledness with achieving, right? And striving for these big accolades. But at the end of the day, if we don't address the root cause, then those things are never going to bring us like lasting satisfaction.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, you're speaking my language here. Like, that is so true. And as someone who, is an achiever and Enneagram 3, like all that stuff.
Yes. Me too.
I totally get that. And I think what I've realized is that when I keep looking ahead to say like, oh, this next milestone, or this is where I want to be and what I want to do, you miss out on so much in the moment. You miss out on the celebration and the joy and the little things that you might actually like be taking pleasure or excitement in, but because you're always looking for that next thing and looking for that next achievement high, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a moment when I was at school. I went to school at UCLA, and that was my dream school for so long. And I was in high school, I was like, I can't wait till I move to LA. I can't wait till I move to LA. And then I get to LA, and I'm like, I can't wait till I graduate because then I can focus full time on acting. And I'm like, I had this moment where I checked in and I was like, this is my dream school and I'm not enjoying it. And I would have continued on my life just being like, okay, well, now I graduated. When's the next thing? And we're never going to enjoy and realize that where we're at now is actually where we wanted to be maybe 2 years ago. And that our perceptions of reality change ever so slightly, that if we don't actively take steps to have gratitude, that we will never be satisfied with where we're at. And so I think especially as threes, it's something that we have to work on. Anyone that's listening that's not familiar with the Enneagram scale, I'm actually I only know certain things about threes. I haven't really studied it too much, but have you studied the Enneagram a good amount?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. So I know that the thing that I really like about the Enneagram is it tells you how you are when you're healthy, and then what your weaknesses are when you're unhealthy. So for threes, there's a lot of great things about being a three. The three is the achiever, quote unquote. And so, yeah, being a perfectionist and being a three has led me to meet my goals and to work really hard and get into my dream school and all those things and work hard on this podcast and my auditions and whatever. But when I'm unhealthy, that's coming, all of that need to achieve is coming from a need to find worthiness in that achievement. And that's where it leads to unhealthy behaviors and patterns.
Right. And just being able to know that what we do is not as important as who we are. I believe that as humans, we're all made in the imago Dei, or image of God. And so therefore we all have this inherent worth no matter what we do or achieve or strive for. At the end of the day, what matters more, is it your heart and the reasons why you're doing that? Or is it the fact that you racked up all of these awards and have, a super expensive car and house or whatever? I think understanding our priorities, like you said, and just understanding that we're worthy of love, and we are worthy as human beings no matter what we achieve or don't achieve.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, a big part of overcoming that has been focusing on other people. If I can focus on the impact that I have on other people, whether that be being kind to someone in the grocery store and making their day. If I can impact just one person every day, it doesn't matter if I fall short in these other achievements that I'm putting this unnatural pressure on myself, because that's how we find purpose, honestly, is by connecting with other people. And when we really strip back why we do a lot of the things that we do, and like for me, like I love acting, I love podcasting, and I want to be successful in those things. But when I strip back why it actually excites me, it's because I love being with other people, right? And so if what I really love is being with other people, then why am I not focusing on the places in my everyday life where I can be connecting with people every single day? And in that space, bringing it back to disagreements, when you're focusing on other people, then you're naturally more empathetic, and you naturally can have those hard conversations and not be reactive and combative.
I love that. That's a great point.
I think, like we've been talking about, a lot of this is just such a journey of appreciating where you're at, like honoring your growth, but not being hard on yourself for the ways that, you know, maybe you're struggling with perfectionism or whatever it is. And so, especially because you work with teen girls, if you could tell yourself, your younger self, one thing, what would it be?
Nobody expects you to be perfect except yourself.
Yeah, that is so powerful, because you know, and we talked about this before too. I think you mentioned this, that like we have these standards for ourselves, but it's so easy to be like, oh, and why are you being so hard on yourself to someone else? I know I do that all the time. And so if we all realize that we think about ourselves a lot more than other people think about us, you know, and like you were saying with the yard, and like only you're going to notice where your yard work is not perfect, maybe. Yesterday I tutor these kids, and so their friends were over, and they were like begging me to take them to Target, which I don't know how they convinced me to bring 4 kids to Target, 10-year-olds to Target. But we're getting in the car. I'm already like feeling hesitant about this, and the girl like opens my back door and like hits the curb. And it's like a relatively new car, and like the bottom of my car door has like a little bit of paint scratched off of it now, but you literally can only see it if you like bend down and like look at it. And so I was frustrated because I'm like, it's still not perfect. Like, I don't care if you can't see it. Like this scratch wouldn't have been there if this little girl didn't get in my car. And so again, it's like, that's a silly example, but how many other times in our life do we have that quote unquote little scratch of paint that you can only see if you bend over, and we're obsessing about it? Because at the end of the day, no one's going to bend down and look at your car like that, and except for you. No one's going to sit and look at these areas of your life that you feel like are imperfections except for you, because again, we're inherently selfish beings. Like, we think about ourselves a lot more than other people do. So I love that reminder that no one expects you to be perfect but you. And then like really embodying that and living in that freedom. And so the question that I ask everyone on this podcast, which is so relevant for this topic, is that what is the imperfection that you are most proud of?
So this is something that I used to be really embarrassed about. So I'll start with that. But I am not great at doing mental math. And when I was in high school, I worked at an ice cream shop and basically like ended up more or less getting fired because I couldn't think about and make change in my head. And, you know, even though that's something that isn't as relevant to like my everyday life now, we pretty much use cards for everything. It's something that I've just recently become like okay with, if that makes sense, like okay with sharing and embracing, because I'm like, you know, if this makes me more relatable, then great. Like, we all struggle with something, right? Being able to name it and own it and not be scared of it, and not be scared of saying I'm imperfect, you're imperfect. We're all imperfect in our own way.
Yeah, and I think that whether it be mental math or whatever, like, people relate a lot more to your weaknesses than your strengths, because it's like, oh, like you struggle with that too, you're not perfect. It allows people to like relax into who they actually are and realize that they don't have to have it all together either. And I feel like a lot of times our purpose is so closely connected to our insecurities or maybe the pain that we've walked through. So even, you know, with Light Speaks Loudest, like you're recognizing a gap that you experienced in you wanted to have this resource as a teen and you didn't have it. And so if everything was perfect for you, right, when you were a teen, then you wouldn't have identified this void that you needed to step into to serve other people. And now seeing the impact that you're having on so many women, it's incredible. But if we lived in this perfect world, then you probably would have never had to do that, right? And so I'm sure that it brings so much fulfillment and joy for you now, being able to serve these girls so well from that place of authenticity, of realizing that you had that lacking for you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If everything was perfect and people were perfect and life was perfect, there would be no need for what I do. And I am really grateful that I get to serve girls in this way.
Yeah. Well, with that, where can people find you and connect with you? Where can they find Light Speaks Loudest?
Yeah, so we're on Instagram at Light Speaks Loudest. That's where we're most active. And then you can also find us at lightspeaksloudest.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Laura. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. And thank you, everyone, for joining in. I'll see you next week.